Hey guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. And today, continuing with our theme of paranormal stories from now until November 1st, and beyond, because spooky bitches got a spooky bitch. I'm gonna tell you guys some spooky, scary stories for a while, and I'm gonna keep that theme going by telling you one of my favorite, more extraterrestrially? Yeah, we're gonna go with that. Extraterrestrially stories about the Men in Black. And I'm not talking about the movie franchise that we all know and love. I'm talking about the actual Men in Black. The stuff that, like, that movie was based on. And you guys, this one's going to be wild. So before we get into it, I just want to say, if there's a story that you want to hear, I'm going to be telling these kind of spooky stories for a while. So definitely leave those in the comments below. I take viewer requests all the time and would love to do a story that you would like to hear on the channel. So, that being said, I don't really have any new business for you. I wish I had new business, but I don't have new business. I have old business. That's a Patreon, which isn't that old. It's actually kind of new. You can check it out. Information will be below. Check out the description box. I put stuff in there for you guys. And myself. Mostly myself. So now we're going to jump into it. And I'm going to tell you guys already off the top, this is going to be weird for a couple of things. The story itself is weird. But also, there's not a lot of evidence, like hard, concrete evidence that I can be like, here's this fact and here's this fact. There's a lot of hearsay, and most of this story is built on word of mouth and just personal experiences, which I will never discredit somebody's, like, unverified personal gnosis, but this is knowledge that has been gained through hearsay. There's a lot of theories, a lot of speculation, but not a lot of factual, concrete things to get into in regards to the Men in Black. So, I thought that we would start at the beginning at what is mostly widely accepted to be the origin of the term Men in Black. One of the first sightings, or at least the earliest sighting that most people agree on, and that is the Maury Island incident, which, if you guys don't know, is also a crazy story. So before the Maury Island incident, prior to the Maury Island incident, there was a pilot named Kenneth Arnold who was at Mount Rainier, and I don't know where that is. I don't even know where Maury Island is. Let me actually look that up. Okay, just kidding. Once I saw a photo of Mount Rainier, I knew where it was. It's in the Pacific Northwest. So I don't feel as bad as I did before I looked it up, but I feel a little bit dumber because I already knew what I didn't think I knew. But Puget Sound, which is something I've heard of but haven't really, like, cared enough to place, is also in the Pacific Northwest. So they're very close. So, Kenneth Arnold, pilot, saw nine unidentified flying objects fly by Mount Rainier at what he's saying was like 12,000 miles an hour. And again, I guess you can tell how fast stuff is moving in the sky from the ground with your eyeballs. I'm going to call Cap, but he's a pilot, he knows things. And this, like, story blew up. Like, all the newspapers were picking it up. Everybody was talking about it. It was getting, like, a bunch of press coverage because, you know, he's a pilot. He's, like, a reputable guy. And he's telling people, like, hey, I saw all these flying, like, discs fly around this mountain. That's weird and strange and suspicious. And because of this, it led to newspapers coining the term flying saucer or flying disc. Obviously, flying saucer stuck around a lot longer than flying disc, but that's, like, the origin of the word, flying saucer, is this guy's, like, identification, and then news stories being like, we need to call it something better than shiny metal disc in the sky, so they came up with flying saucer, and that's still something we use to this day. And then, about, like, 10 days after this original, like, sighting, Captain E.J. Smith, who happens to be his co-pilot, Kenneth Arnold's co-pilot, and some stewardess who doesn't get named on Wikipedia, so Thank you for that. Also reported seeing similar objects flying over the Pacific Northwest. And so then, after getting all this hype and attention, Arnold gets reached out to by the editor of a magazine called Amazing Stories. And he tells him that there are 2 harbor patrolmen in Tacoma, also in the Pacific Northwest, who also have had the same experience, have seen these flying saucers, and actually have bits of metal and fragments left behind from the flying saucers. So the editor ends up giving him some money to fly out to Tacoma to go investigate the situation and get some more information, because apparently at this time Kenneth Arnold has been determined to be the expert on sci-fi spooky things. So they were like, you've seen some, go look at the metal junk they have and tell us if it's from that. So they send him out there. So Arnold flies out there. He ends up meeting the guy, Harold Dahl, who tells him that in the afternoon, in the bright, sunshiny afternoon, he is driving his boat, his little patrol boat, along the shore of Maury Island, or a bay by Maury Island. And on the board, there were 2 crewmen, his son, his dog. And when they looked up into the sky, they saw that there were 6 donut-shaped aircraft. So 6 donut-shaped. And it just makes me wonder if there was a hole, or if this was a jelly-filled donut, or a bear claw donut. I need more specifics than donut shape. But apparently that's what was in the sky. So 6 flying saucers. And they start to shed debris that they thought initially was newspaper, but it turned out to be a super light, white colored metal that fell down to the earth. Because it's so light, it fluttered down like newspaper. And then he also adds at the same time, I'm also really confused because this white metal stuff falls down, but at the same time, these giant rocks fall down, and they're kind of like lava rocks, and they also fall from these craft, and it kills their dog. So, sorry, trigger warning, sorry. The dog dies, and one of the workers gets their arm broken, and his son gets injured as well. So, this is what Dahl tells him happened to him outside of Maury Island, which is sensational, also very interesting. And then they had kept a couple of bits of metal that they wanted to investigate after the incident. And Dahl says that he reports it, the whole incident, to Superior Officer Fred Chrisman, who also helped join in the investigation. And then later on, when they go to question Dahl about this metal and what's happening to it, he tells them that he was approached by a man in a dark suit who told him not to talk about the incident. So when Dahl's superior, Chrisman, shows the metal to Arnold, he shows them this whitish light type metal, and Arnold's that could be fucking anything, and it doesn't really match with this type of stuff that you described to me in the story. It doesn't match up with Dahl's story. So he decides to contact military intelligence and get with them to see if they can analyze this metal and maybe get some answers. So 2 military intelligence guys, they come to Arnold's hotel up there, and they gather their own samples, and they get the little bits of metal and stuff, and they get on a plane to go back to base so that they can analyze what they found. And tragically, in the early hours of the morning, they died when the plane that they were piloting crashed outside of Kelso, Washington, on their way back to the base in California. So the 2 guys who came to investigate die with all the evidence they gathered from the incident. And then afterwards, the FBI goes and investigates the case to figure out what happened here, how these 2 military intelligence officers died, what the actual story is here. And then they decide that Chrisman and Dahl's story was a big hoax. But they also put in their files that Dahl completely admitted that if he was going to be questioned, by the authorities, like in any regard to his story. He was just gonna flat out say it was a hoax so that he didn't have to deal with it or like deal with any like trouble that would arise from like insisting it was true. So he tells the authorities he's going to tell them it's a hoax, and they're like, well, he admitted he was going to lie about it being a hoax, so it's definitely a hoax. Write that down. And they wrote both things down as like facts about the case. So the FBI is like, we don't know what happened here. It was clearly a hoax, and these poor military guys died as a result of it. So to add some credibility, I guess, to the idea that it might have just all been a hoax, it seems like Chrisman and Dahl went around to a couple of local newspapers and tried to like drum up hype for it so that they could end up selling the story for like national disbursement. And it was also determined that the Tacoma Harbor Patrol, the company that Chrisman and Dahl work for, is a private for-profit business that would charge the owners of like the homes and the vacation homes around there for security. And so like being like, oh, there's something super dangerous happening, you should definitely hire us to keep an eye on your homes, especially if you're not going to be there, might have been part of the plan here, like the idea behind this whole hoax in the first place. So it kind of lends credibility to it being a hoax versus it being actual. But I feel like if somebody tells you, I'm just going to lie about this, and then they tell you the lie, you know, maybe don't write that down like it's a fact. I don't know. I'm not the FBI. So, at any rate, a little while after this whole incident occurs, people start to talk about how this is a super huge hoax, and like it sort of hinders the investigation into like UFO exploration, because at this time, like in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, like, but in the early 50s and 60s, like the UFO craze went like bananas. It was a huge phenomenon. Sightings were reported everywhere. There kept being new incidents popping up, and it was kind of the thing that like occupied the cultural like zeitgeist for a long time. Like everyone was like, yes, this is absolutely what's happening. Everyone is seeing UFOs, and they're very, very real at this point. So this like incident was sort of like tarnishing that reputation and credibility to the stories, although many people, especially in the conspiracy theory universe, are like, this story isn't a hoax because these two guys admitted to it being a hoax, and the FBI never prosecuted them. And conversely, people would argue that the FBI actually did seriously consider prosecuting them, but they couldn't directly blame them for the incident that cost those two military intelligence guys their lives. Like, they couldn't put the explosion of the plane or the crash on them. So they were like, well, let them go, I guess. And that's basically what happened. So depending on whose side you're on or what story you're reading, some will say the Maury Island incident is an incident, and others will say it's a hoax, and it just sort of depends where you stand there. So all of this to say, this is the origin of where the Men in Black come from, right? And what are the Men in Black? Because we didn't get a very detailed like explanation in that story about the Maury Island incident. It's just the first time that these Men in Black have shown up, and then they showed up in direct relation to a UFO sighting, which is almost always the case in most stories, although like as time goes on, they sort of show up anytime something supernatural happens, and I feel like that's more of a conflation of the mythos than anything. But that's my personal opinion, so it could be true, it could be legit, I don't know. But I feel like that's sort of the story growing wider and wilder than, like, is to be expected. Well, it's exactly to be expected. It's just grown a lot over time, so I feel like the lore is expanding as time goes on. But because there isn't a lot to go off of that original description, what we see is over time, little bits and pieces have been added to the legend of the Men in Black, and there's a few things that sort of stand out or really come together as like key distinctive features of the Men in Black, so we're going to get into that. So, they do dress all in black, that is for sure. Interestingly, they tend to dress in oversized clothing, which may or may not be necessarily oversized, because they're all described as pale, like super deathly pale, most commonly Caucasian men who are extremely thin, like very sallow-faced, a little bit on the skeletal to bony side sometimes. They just look like they're very worn away. Their skin is like very pale, like deathly pale. It has sort of a pallor to it, and it's sometimes a little bit like damp looking, which is also gross, so gross. But they're just extremely pale, very thin men dressed in over large clothing, which may have originally fit them at some point, and I'll tell you why that is a possibility later. But right now, it just looks like they're wearing like mismatched size clothes for their frames. Because the clothes are always a little bit large. They are either depicted as completely hairless, like they have no eyebrows, no hair, or they have just like close cut hair, but it's like you can barely see it because they're almost always wearing some kind of hat, like a bowler hat or a fedora. And just imagine, like, at the time, like, what they would wear, like men in suits in the 1950s and 60s. Like, that's kind of the vibe, and it looks like they've never evolved fashion-wise past the suits of the 1950s and 60s, which, if I'm recalling my, like, fashion history correctly, were also a little bit larger to go along with, like, the trend at the time. They're not nearly as tailored as suits that we wear today. So yeah, you're gonna get these guys, and they're also very tall. They're very tall. Sickly pale looking, very thin guys in over large clothes. They look a little damp, which is so gross. And they're normally wearing sunglasses. So just imagine like the most unattractive version of the Men in Black movie, like Men in Black people possible. That's what you're dealing with here. The actual Men in Black are kind of off-putting to look at, and people describe being approached by these men and feeling an instant like hatred, like instinctively something is wrong, and they know that the men are the cause of that problem, and they feel very repelled by them, or they find themselves like angry at their presence because they're threatened by them. So they have this very like antagonistic sort of presence, which goes along with the fact that they are almost always agree to speak very robotically. Like, they don't have any tone or inflection in their voice, so they're very monotone, but the way that they speak, like the manner they speak, is very robotic. And because their voice is very flat and monotone and emotionless, their faces are emotionless, their whole mannerisms are emotionless, and it seems like the only emotion they convey is threat, like anger, threat. They don't even try to play like approachable. They're just very bland until they're threatening you. So all that together leads to a very terrifying image. I would never want to encounter these guys. Like, just two random dudes show up at your door and then they're threatening you and they're not even funny about it. Like, fuck that noise. No, it's awful. So Wikipedia describes them as male quasi-governmental agents dressed in black suits who question, interrogate, harass, threaten, allegedly memory wipe, and sometimes even assassinate unidentified flying object witnesses to keep them silent about what they have seen. That's a direct quote. Which is basically the rub of what you're dealing with when you're talking about Men in Black. The quasi-governmental part is that they appear to be like affiliated with the government in some sort of way, but they never produce evidence that they are. So they have no like official branch or link to that. People will report that they will show them like a blank white card, kind of like that psychic paper in Doctor Who. Like, sometimes they just will show a blank white card. Sometimes the card will say security on it or have, like, an emblem that nobody recognizes. But they'll show that card like it's something official. And then, you know, they continue to talk to you about, you know, the sighting of UFOs or your study of UFOs. They have been reported by people who have either reported being abducted, reported seeing UFOs, or people who study the entire side of like abductions and the paranormal and UFOs. And I don't even think they're called UFOs anymore. Hold on. Okay, yeah, now it's UAP, which is unidentified aerial phenomenon, but that doesn't roll off the tongue like UFOs, so it can sit on the shelf until I'm ready to use it. So at any rate, what they do in almost every story is like consistent in the fact that person A, the person who is either telling the story or the person who is relaying the story is talking about. Person A has seen UFOs, experienced UFOs, found some fragment or bit or piece of a UFO left over, and then the Men in Black show up. They intimidate, they threaten, or they try to show them that they have some sort of otherworldly power, such as changing like copper coins into silver. I don't know why that's like the flex, but it is. So that person never talks about like UFOs again, or they don't report their sightings, or they destroy whatever evidence, or they hand it over. That seems to be like the main goal of the Men in Black, is to erase the existence of like UFOs talked about in culture. There are reported sightings of Men in Black at like events or locations where spooky shit happens. So people will report having seen them in the crowd when people gather to like watch a UFO phenomenon or something like that. They'll say that they're there. But most of the stories seem to be the Men in Black will either go to your workplace or they'll go to your house, and then they will shake you down to find out how much you know and then make you like be silent about it. As a side note, in the Wikipedia article, words are really hard, there's like a little tiny blurb about folklore, and I was really excited to like see like in depth like the folklore connections for this, and it just gives like a single sentence where they talk about folklorist James R. Lewis comparing the Men in Black to like the old-timey tales of people who would see Lucifer or like the devil. Like there's a lot of folklore stories of like Joe Blow meets the devil, and here's how wise Abel beat the devil, and like here's how this poor guy beat the devil. There's tons of folklore, especially like in the Appalachians, but also in more rural like Eastern European places where there's a ton of folklore of people who just happen to meet the devil and then get like the upper hand or be cursed forever by them. And so it's just something really interesting. But in his book, I guess, he calls it sort of a psychological trauma. And I wanted to know more about it, but I didn't want to buy his book. So, like, here we are. If anyone has ever read the book by James R. Lewis and knows what he meant, like, in depth about it, please leave that comment below, because I would love to hear more about it, because I do think it's really interesting that that comparison was made, because they are kind of like the boogeyman of this sort of particular subgenre of paranormal, like, activity. Like, they show up everywhere, and people either get one over on them, they escape from them, or they live to, like, tell the tale another day. Like, it's very fascinating. So it's commonly believed that the Men in Black sort of arose along with the hype and hysteria of like the UFO sightings of the time and all the extraterrestrial activity, and sort of as a way to be like, here's this sort of scarier side, like scarier than the aliens is the government conspiracy to cover it all up and like keep the truth from you. So that's kind of like where that sort of idea sort of found like root and like grew, from the idea that people were trying to suppress this knowledge. And it's a very common outlet and like way out of stories for conspiracy theorists to be like, see, they're trying to cover it up because the Men in Black showed up. Like, it's a very common and easy way to sort of like fudge up the details. A lot of people who have reported seeing UFOs or possessing like pieces and parts of them will then later on say like, oh, well, I had the part, but then the Men in Black showed up and they forced me to hand over all the evidence that I had, so I don't have it anymore, sorry. Like, and that's a thing. And like, I know I'm saying it sarcastically, but like, it seems to be a very true thing that these people experience. I'm not trying to discount that from those people. I'm just saying it's very convenient. I don't have like a lot of hard concrete cases, like I said, because everything is everyone's like conjecture and word of mouth. I wish I had more to like share with you guys. I will say that there is a noted UFOologist named John Keel who has reported several encounters with the Men in Black, but refers to them as demonic supernaturals. So like there's that whole demon-y angle too. Like they could just be sort of another genre of like supernatural creature trying to cover up the existence of supernatural creatures, so that, you know, people aren't aware of their presence and they can keep doing supernatural shenanigans. There are some tales of the black-eyed children, which I've talked about in another episode, so check the playlist of For Storycraft in the description box to see more about the black-eyed children if you're curious about that. But there's some cases where the black-eyed children who will ask to use like the phone to call their parents, if they are let inside to use the phone, people will have like really bad experiences or health issues because they let them inside. But then the men in black will show up to pick them up like they were the parents all along. I don't know how much of that is like connected or like, once again, just the sort of natural progression of the lore where the men in black seem to be removing the children from the presence after they've done their damage. It's very interesting, but I don't know how much to go into that. I will say I'm not supporting anything done by John Keel because he describes the men in black as having dark skin or exotic facial features, and he can get fucked for that because that seems racist, and it is racist, as everybody else describes them as being white men who look like corpses. And he's the only person I've seen describe them as having dark skin and dark features, so fuck off, dude. At any rate, on the note of them being corpses, an interesting theory about what the men in black are, because like, right, I've told you what they do, what they look like, but we don't really know what they are, right, because they're not affiliated with the government. But there's a lot of theories about what they might actually be. So they might be time police. They might be space police. They might be tools used by aliens to cover up their own activity. So like a special force that comes down to cover up any shenanigans the aliens have done as they're like doing their thing, right? But they might also be on that same thought train, space police and corpses. They might be reanimated corpses who are doing the policing on the behalf of the aliens. I'm just going to let that marinate. They're corpse space police, which would account for their gross appearance and their thin, like, bodies and their oversized clothes, because it might be clothes that they were buried in, and now, because their bodies have, like, shrunk up in the grave, are too big for them. And the moistness might be like what's left over from the process of reanimation, but also because they were rotting, and that's so gross. It's so gross. This is my least favorite theory, only because I just think it's so disgusting. I much prefer like space police that are actual space police and not reanimated corpse space police. I have heard some stuff about them being time police in regards to them like trying to maintain the timeline and trying to cover up this activity because like it would expose us to the larger alien world controlling the timeline. It's a little bit wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey, all over the place stuff. That being said, it's an interesting little tidbit. They could just be aliens themselves. People who have reported seeing the men in black have reported that they seem to be like unnaturally interested in things that are really mundane and typical, like pens and cans and all sorts of things, like just regular human stuff. There is a subset of people who believe that there are also women in black, and that is equality, and I'm here for it. They're said to also wear black, but they tend to wear dresses that are a little bit like chuggy and like not in style whatsoever and really out of place for the setting that they're in. So like avant-garde style dresses when they're just going grocery shopping and things like that. And they do go grocery shopping, some people believe, which is crazy, but they only buy canned meats, which is also crazy. But it's said that the women in black are rarer, but they're also like evil. Like the men in black are like robotic and awful in their own way, but like they're not super evil entities. They're just intimidating and cold and unfeeling. Whereas the women in black seem to have like a evil hidden agenda like behind the scenes, and they're like super manipulative, and they're very like angry, and they may even possess some psychic ability like to suppress your memories or to attack you psychically in some way, to like intimidate you into giving up the evidence or listening to what they say. It has even been sort of speculated that the men in black are kind of like a hive mind species, in the sense that like not like they're all connected in one mind, but like how bees are with a queen. So these women in black might actually be like the queen bees, sending out their little men in black drones to do things. And then when that's not enough, they show up and they like shut it all down. Which I also love for them for that. It is also said that learning about the Men in Black, talking about the Men in Black, affiliating yourself with UFO research in any way, will attract the Men in Black to you. So, sorry, you're in the game now because you've learned about them. And if you see any Men in Black, no, you didn't, and it's not my fault. Even though it is. So basically, that's everything I had to say about the Men in Black. They are sort of silently disquieting, discomforting to me. I don't really find the tale of them to be like one that I enjoy. I find it to be unsettling, especially because there's like not just like the fact that you learn about them and then you start to see them everywhere, kind of like shadow people, but the fact that like they also can impact like technology sometimes. So if this doesn't make it out in one piece, or the sound quality goes to like shit, it's them, it's not me. I didn't do it. Everything was perfect when I did it, so they've interfered somehow. And I have heard a lot of like people on podcasts and stuff talk about it, and then there's like weird music or like interference on their recording, so that just makes me very uncomfortable. The whole idea makes me a little bit uncomfortable, and I really did like had to think about whether or not I wanted to share the story with you guys or like tell you anything about it. Just because I was like, well, if I say something, then they're going to know that I know about them. And if they know that I know that they know, like, it was just like a whole thing where I had to have like a long moment. But then I was like, no, you got this. You can do this. You're a big, brave dog. So I got in there and I did it. So I told you guys this story, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any UFO sightings, I would say don't share them in the comments unless you want to be visited. But totally share them in the comments. I would love to know if you've seen anything. And I'm going to leave you guys here with that little note. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think the Men in Black are from this Earth, or do you think they're from another Earth? I've heard some like theories about them being like the guardians of the simulation. If you believe that like existence is a simulation, it's their job to keep it on track. It gives me very big Matrix vibes, which is one of my favorite movies of all times. So I'm very into that. They're kind of like the Mr. Smiths of the Matrix, if you're familiar with that property. So I'm really into that idea because I love the Matrix. I love and hate the Matrix, but I love the Matrix. So they might just be here to like keep the simulation on track and keep any weird glitches like from, fucking up the simulation. And that's cool, but also terrifying. So, just a lot of like cool but bad information about them, and I hope that you enjoyed learning about it. I definitely had fun trying to figure out where this whole story came from. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces, and as always, happy crafting. I'll catch you guys all next time. Bye!